Welcome to Kokua meeting, where we're going to talk about resources on grief and bereavement. And we have two presenters today. The first one, known to most of us, is Dr. Pat Nishimoto, longtime Kokua volunteer. I think she worked for 150 years as an oncology nurse specialist up at Queens, and one of my favorite people in the world. But our other speaker, Sara-May Colón, is an amazing asset and resource. And if people don't know Sara-May, you'll get to know her today. And hopefully, as you engage with the Bereavement Network of Hawaii, you will get to know her more too. She is also just such a blessing here in our community. So Sara-May is the Director of Mission and Spiritual Care at Castle, or Adventist Health Castle. She serves as a chaplain, and she has had a variety of different careers and trainings. And she said she's had careers in art, teaching, pastoral care, pastoring, and biotech. And she's ended up in Hawaii to be closer to her nieces and her family. And so we're going to have Pat go first, and then Sara-May. So I'm turning things over to Pat to start out.
Felicia, who is somebody I want to be someday when I grow up, if I grow up, couldn't be with us today. But she wanted to share two ways for us to think about coping with the stress that comes with working with the bereaved. So if this goes well, congratulate Felicia. So she reminded us that there's two big holidays in April. April 28th is Superhero Day. Did you know that? We're going to learn how to harness those superhero skills today so we can use it to cope. So you got to work with me, guys. I want you to please stand up. Please stand. Take a deep breath. Stand tall. Put your feet firmly below you. Put your hands on your hips. Pull your shoulders back. Look straight into the horizon. A big smile. Good. And now say, yes, yes, I can. Ready? Yes, yes, I can. Good. It only takes a couple of seconds to do that. You're allowed to sit down now that you made A of yourself. And maybe you'll want to do it out of view of other people, but standing in that position, Felicia taught me that years ago when I co-taught with her. It really can give you this sense of energy and, yeah, I can do this. I can go back in there and I can help. So when you're feeling totally overwhelmed, maybe not out in the middle of the ward for everybody to see you, maybe go into the bathroom, but it's a thought. Just put your hands on your hips and think about it. The second holiday of April is National Stress Awareness Month. It's also National Humor Awareness Month, but Stress Awareness Month has been held every April since 1992, and it's to raise awareness of causes and cures for modern stress epidemic. People talk about self-care all the time, right? Especially to this group. And what do we say? I don't have time. Well, guys, it's not a 2-week vacation that we're talking about. You do have time. It's 1 minute. You can take 1 minute for being aware, right? You've heard so many things about what to do for self-care that I wanted to go maybe in a little bit different direction that you've heard about. Creativity. Think about getting creative, because creativity, it uses a different part of your brain from where you experience the stress, right? And when you engage in creative activities, it can help you escape from the stressors and prevent overthinking. And a lot of us do that. Lots of us think we're not creative because we can't paint or we can't draw. But if that's not your jam, you could still be creative in other ways. Baking, I would be glad to take any of the baked goods. Chocolate is good. writing, singing, playing a musical instrument, crafting. They're all ways to get creative and lower stress levels. The world's most accessible stress reliever is singing. And I can see some of you frowning because last time I spoke, I made you all sing with me. I'm not going to do that this time, Michelle, just chill. The physical exertion involved in singing, when you fill your lungs, right? The firm control of your vocal cords, the movements of your mouth and your body as you're singing, that's what can help boost your mood. It's an aerobic exercise. It releases endorphins, those brain's feel-good chemicals. So Hope or Jeanette, one of them, is going to play a quick little video of how Tripler nurses and staff in the neonatal intensive care unit dealt with the stress of COVID and those stinking masks. Anyway, I think that video, even though they're my friends and my new family and Ohana at Tripler, I think they really talk about stress awareness and also about humor awareness, which is this month. So thanks for listening. And now we go to the main part of it. Jeanette, will you please introduce our next speaker, Sara-May?
Sara-May, you can just jump in.
I'm ready. Thanks.
Go.
Did anyone else notice her epic earrings? I think that's stress reducing. Just put some cows and ribbons on. I mean, what are they?
Oh,
Pigs?
When
Pigs
pigs may
and
fly. Absolutely. Or you can shave your head.
I know.
Money
All
for
of us-
pediatric cancer.
We just all need to be more like Pat. This is my conclusion of the day. But thank you for that. There's so many things that you talked about that I thought was interesting. I mean, who knew that we would be celebrating and making short films about taking masks off and that being like one of the most exciting parts of people's years. And then at the same time, I think also the theory of superheroes, we've talked a lot about heroes during COVID, like people that show up, whether it be grocery store stocking people, whether it be teachers, whether it be nurses or doctors or whomever it may be. And we've gotten used to saying heroes now. And I think really journeying alongside anyone at this point in life is so fragile and so beautiful at the same time that there's just so much to be said about what a hero looks like. And it doesn't always have to be someone with a cape. Sometimes it's just a pep talk. Sometimes it's you teaching someone to stand firmly planted. And sometimes it's coming together as a community to see how we can just make a better space. My personal favorite is Batman because he chose to be good. He didn't get some weird freakish situation and then have to come to something with that, but instead he chose to care for his community and to do something with a lot of negativity as his story and narrative. But I'm really excited to be with you guys. As Jeanette said, I'm Sara-May Colón. I'm the Director of Mission and Spiritual Care here at Adventist Health Castle. I've been here for about 5 years, and I've been in chaplaincy on and off throughout my lifetime, really. So it's been about 20 years of versions of ministry and other things. And I've just really enjoyed the opportunity to be here and to work with the Bereavement Network. I saw a couple of the crew on here, Bonnie and of course, Pat and Jeanette and Hope and all these other people. So there's a lot of people representing here. But one of the things that we talked about a couple months ago in our Bereavement Network was resources on island and how we handle that. And so really what I wanted to do is kind of a mashup of things. Is I want to kind of share where the bereavement network list is housed, and then also a resource that kind of, I think, started this conversation that I helped create for Castle that is available to anyone in the community, and then some other really cool resources that were designed locally by people. And I just think that's such a cool thing, is to be able to support locally. This is so fun. We're in a whole different room now. So I am going to go ahead and start with the Bereavement Network. So I'm going to share this screen. As you guys know, this is the lovely Kokua Mau page that all of you should know how to find, right? And Kokua Mau has been awesome. Marcus has been awesome at helping make sure everything is updated. And we're going to continue to keep updating things. But on the Kokua Mau website is this really sneaky section that maybe not everyone goes to, and it's the resource section for grief and bereavement. When you click on that, it's really beautiful because they have resources, obviously powerful videos, but they also have this downloadable Bereavement Network of Hawaii PDF. And I don't know how many people look at it. I'll be honest, some things on it are a little outdated, but I've been calling personally one by one to make sure that we get the most updated information, to make sure that it's all the grief groups that are going to be happening are actually still happening, because everything was kind of wonky before, during, after COVID. And so there's just been a lot of changes of like, now we have virtual and in person. And even me, I looked, this is my embarrassing part, mine's incorrect. So I was like, oh, probably not anyone else is checking this. But what's so cool about this is it's a series of islands coming together to support our community, right? And I think the coolest part about being in Hawaii is it's not a competition. It's not who does more. It's really, how do we as a community rally and support each other and support our ohana, whomever that may be, because chances are it's someone you know is auntie or uncle, right? And I think what's so cool is that here I see a group of people coming together to share resources and not compete for resources, and to make sure that we have more and more available to people. So if you ever are interested, there's lots of different things, whether it be for, men's grief support groups, whether it be for Grief Share, which happens in multiple locations. There's also hospices. There's things for kids. Let Grace In was mentioned in our breakout room, different things like that. And there's just a lot of resource here. So if you give me a couple weeks, it will be completely updated. But you can still go there now. They're just some mild, just call the number and you'll be fine. But don't quote exactly what's on there right now. But I just think it's really cool that there's that many resources. So that is one thing I wanted to share. And then the thing I wanted to kind of jump into first, and then I'll share some local resources, is a resource that I actually made for Castle. What's interesting about working in a hospital is we have a different dynamic than hospice or social workers or case managers or nurses or really anyone else, right? Because as a chaplain, we're there for all really intense moments, and then some of those silent moments where nothing is happening, but the space is there. And so we just go in it, right? And we're there for the patients, the families, the community, the staff, pretty much anyone that says, hey, we could use something, or maybe we notice someone needing something. And one of the things that I noticed was, especially during COVID, was the anxiety of what now, right? Everyone was already on the edge. Everyone was already freaking out about a ton of things. And then I had resources, quote unquote, but they were like piecemealed resources. Like, here's a pamphlet from this one place. Here's the funeral list from Kokua Mau. Here's this other thing. And I realized it was stressful for me as the chaplain who's trying to bridge that gap, especially in the ER in a sudden trauma or a death, or even up on the unit when someone gets COVID and passes faster than anyone anticipated, and family's not even there. So you're just on the phone. I spent most of COVID narrating end of life situations to family members over iPads or phones or whatever. And it was really interesting because I started realizing, like, man, we really need a place to put all of our resources so people just have access. And so what we did was we created a booklet. I stole from multiple different Adventist health hospitals, pieces of it, and then some other areas, and put in some stuff that I just thought was interesting. And we created this bereavement guide in a time of loss. What I tell people is, if anything in here is interesting, it's actually on our website. If you search bereavement guide, Adventist Health Castle bereavement guide, it's free download, and you can cut out any piece of it you want, and you don't even need to give me credit. Just use it, right? The more we can do for our community, the better. So I'm just going to scoot through some of this stuff so you see some of the resources that are in there, and then we'll go to some other local resources as well. Any questions before I ramble on? No. All right. So obviously we have Chinaman's hat, but here it just has a little bit of an intro of the mission, vision, values, and then our table of contents. So what to expect, whole person grief, what others can do to help, holidays, helping yourself through grief, how to help a grieving child, planning a service, checklist, what to do and when, funeral, cremation, memorial services, death certificate, social security, veterans benefits, resources for adults, resources for children and teens, and then grief support and coping skills, and of course, the frequently asked questions. So I'm going to kind of scroll through on the things that I thought was personally most helpful for when I was dealing with family members, especially. I'm speaking specifically to the ER, but in general, this tends to be part of the stressor when people pass, right? So there's some poetry and stuff and a little note. But I think one of the things that all of you know is what to expect is numbness, searching, disorganization, despair, and just kind of acknowledging people where they're at. You know, you're not bonkers for feeling disorganized and confused and disheveled and like you don't even know how to shower anymore. That is completely okay and normal. And so I think there's a level of affirmation that's needed when we deal with people in these intense moments. Even if they've been on hospice for a year or two, I think people don't actually know what to do when it finally does happen, you know? And so I think there's just a level of you think you're prepared, and then when you're not, it feels even crazier. So just acknowledging that. And then, of course, talking about the whole person grief. Out of an entire community, you guys understand whole person grief, right? Whether it be physical, mental, spiritual, all the existential crises that somehow you land in when you're trying to navigate what is life after this death. And then we go into a section, what others can do to help. This was one of the areas that I think, especially around Christmas time, I got a lot of questions for, is like, I don't know what to do. How do I even begin to tell people how to help me? Like, all these things. So there's some little nuggets of like, you know, make a list when you think of things that you are overwhelmed to do. And then when a friend asks, say, yeah, actually, can you do my laundry? You know, like that was really overwhelming last week. And actually that would be really helpful. Or whether it be holiday season and like figuring out how to send out information or allowing people to support you in that. And also realizing that like, you don't have to do anything for holiday season if you don't want to. So the empowerment of like, you meet yourself where you're at. You don't need to meet anyone else's expectation. And then, of course, there's helping yourself through grief, which is pretty self-explanatory. But I did put join a grief support group right here with Kokua Mao's website. So shout out to Kokua Mao. And then grieving children. I think one of the things that we do that is really bad is sometimes we sugarcoat things to kids. Sometimes that's important, but also realizing that kids are really smart. They know a lot now. They have internet, they have Google, they have TikTok that explains everything to them. It's not that they don't know. And I think the resentment can come out if we're not honest. And so I think being real with kids was a big thing for me, especially because I have nieces around the age that ask all of the questions. And I started realizing real quick, you can't just say because anymore or make up some frivolous, crazy answer. They're like, but why? You know, and they want to know the heart of it. And so I think authenticity actually, you know, within the scope is really healthy for kids in their journey for grief. And then of course, ideas. The part that I really want to hop to is the checklist of what to do and when. I think one of the biggest challenges is people get overwhelmed with all the things and they end up doing what procrastinators do, and they try to take things out of order. So whatever they can do to not have to do this other thing, where if we give them a specific checklist, which can always grow, I think it helps people just kind of focus and emotionally check things off, or they can add to this list so that way they don't feel like they forget it and won't stay up all night going, holy cow, what if I forget to ask for this many death certificates? Or what if I forget to call this person? It just gives them a space to kind of brain dump and then check it off. So there's clarity in where they've been. Because also, as you know, in grief, people tend to forget a lot, right? You think you did it, you thought you communicated that thing, but really you just thought about it a lot. So little things like death certificates, get 10 to 15. Everyone asks for an authentic one, and it's a pain in the rear end to go back to try to get a new one when you need more. So it's easier to just get it all at once. Say, I need 10 to 15, pay it, you have them. So anytime something comes up, you can just deal with it. And then it just kind of goes through like even things down to child support services or debtors or DMV or whatever it may be. And it keeps going. We also did a different breakdown of it because I realized that a lot of people get overwhelmed with when to do things and what are the priorities. So we did our best at breaking down the first week, Here's things you need to do the second week. Here's things you need to do third week. And then after the first month. Now, in some religious traditions, like especially I'm speaking specifically about Judaism and some of those, they have certain amount of days that they don't do anything. And so I say, if that's part of your faith tradition or your tradition culturally, start first week when you're supposed to start first week. That doesn't mean it has to be first week since point of death, right? And so just being conscious of how like a lot of this stuff can wait. It just gets really overwhelming if you wait too long, right? And then a little bit more after the third month, after the 6th month, and then after 1 year. And I love that it says here, make decisions about your future living arrangements, because I think people try to problem solve everything in the first month, and it gets really unsettling and makes people feel ungrounded. A couple other things, we made a list of the memorial places and cremation and funeral on island and also in neighbor islands. But then we refer to the Kokua because they have that updated list. And so actually in our book, we put that printed out list in there, which is updated. So that's even better. And we just are able to put those in there. So when they are updated, there's new ones in there and we don't get the outdated information in a printed book. Some more information about death certificates, Social Security. We have our local Social Security and also the federal, and just kind of what you need for that to make sure you're on top of it, and also the VA information. And then there's, of course, some resources. A lot of these are based off of like Adventist Health, not necessarily Hawaii, but I hope to one day update this a little bit better. And then at the end, we talk about grief support and the power of that. And that goes back to Kokua and the grief resources on the Bereavement Network. And then we talk about different coping skills. So sometimes they don't want to see anyone else, but it's nice to have like a little self-help section where you can go like, yes, this is what I need to do or try for. And then, of course, we have the frequently asked questions. So these are all questions that have been asked me more than like 5 times in the ER. Like, what is an autopsy? What is embalming? What happens next? What if I don't have a mortuary chosen? And then what is the difference between a mortuary and a funeral home? And then what is a medical examiner or ME? So like when those trauma cases, when they're like, we have to wait for the ME, no one explains what an ME is. So sometimes it's nice to just have that and then explain what is cremation, because you'd be surprised how many people actually have no idea what cremation is. And then there's just a space for notes. And what's really cool is that we recently just got to the point where we have started doing grief boxes on the units. So that way everything for grief is in one area, because often we lose things, right? Like one person knows where everything is and then the next person has no idea. So then they put it in a new spot when we bring the resources, and soon there's like 15 to 20 different spots, but no one actually knows where all the stuff is. And so we started trying to put together grief boxes, whether it be with journals so people can write their questions down and receive their answers and then share with the family or whatever it may be. So that's one of the resources that was created. The thing I loved so much about actually sharing this with the Bereavement Network is that afterwards I had a whole conversation and we got the opportunity to find out that there's a lot more going on and people have created their own versions of things. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm going to leave it in the not full PowerPoint way. But if you look here, some of you guys know this book was designed and created by a community of people. It's really incredible. I talked to a couple people about it. I actually had the opportunity to be part of this book, but it's Courage Poured Into My Heart, Stories of Grief, Hope, and Love. And it was kind of led by these 3 on the back. And it's just incredibly cool that a bunch of people, especially in Hawaii, came together to do poetry and art and to be able to tell a story of someone they loved. And there's been at least 2 people that read the book and said it was what they needed because it helped them kind of go alongside other people's journeys and realize like, wow, there's so much beauty that can be in death. And it's not just the end of a story. We can still share that legacy and we can still do stuff. And so it's pretty cool. Family bereavement support, they meet at the Downtown Art Center, and they're the ones that kind of came up with this whole thing. And Felicia has been working alongside them for that. The other thing that I thought was super cool was this was an after conversation. How many of you guys have heard of this book, My Journey with the Wind? Yeah, it is super incredible. This was actually written by the community and Let Grace In. So one of our local groups, they decided to design a book and write a story about a kid going through grief as they knew their kids were going through grief. And it's illustrated incredibly. At the very end of it, there's these really cool questions that you can ask and activities that kids can do. And so it's super helpful for kids as they're kind of navigating that grief. And you can buy this on Amazon, which I think is awesome because it's easy access to most of us, right? So I know I could have gone and picked one up from Let Grace In, but I actually ordered it on Amazon just because I felt like at least then it's supporting them being noted, right? And I think that's an incredible resource as well. And then there's, of course, Compassionate Friends who has resources, Grief Share, all these other people have these workbooks and these resources right here on island that help us kind of navigate these tough conversations. So I think what I wanted to point out in all of this is that there's incredible wisdom and a wealth of information right here. And one of the hopes is that we can come together and kind of create more and put together, whether it be reading lists, whether it be resources, whether it be a music soundtrack or a movie list or whatever it may be. I think it would be really cool to be able to come up with something along those lines to make sure that as we continue to grow and work together and support our community, that we have the resources at hand and we can kind of lean into each other. And so I think that's the real beauty of being part of the Bereavement Network, is making sure that we're actually finding those resources. And when we find a hole in something or a missing link, we can kind of try to patch it up as a community and find more support for that realm. So that is my speedy round of really quickly talking about the Bereavement Network and some of the resources that have just come to the front. Are there any questions or any comments or anything that you guys would like?
So there was a question, Sara-May, how people could, Mimi from the Jewish community wanted to know how to get resources in. So if you could answer that, and then if people go through and read and think, oops, it needs to be updated, talk about that.
Yeah. So are you referring to the Bereavement Network list? Or
I think so, yeah.
So to get to the BNOH list, you go to the Kokua website, so kokuamau.org, and then you go to, let me make sure I don't lie to you, you go to Resources tab, and you scroll down to Grief and Bereavement. It's right above Making Decisions Regarding Mortuaries. And if you click on that, there's this one line that says Download the Bereavement Network of Hawaii list. And so you should be able to download it there. If you notice something is incorrect, you can email me or Felicia, and I'm happy to put my email in the chat. But then that way we can go ahead and update it. And if you're already in there, expect a call from me if you haven't already, because I'm stalking everyone. But you can go ahead and just let us know when you see something that's changed, or if you know something's changing. At least that way you have an ability to make sure it's updated appropriately. And if you want to be on the Bereavement Network of Hawaii, you can go ahead and email me as well, or Felicia or Banyan, and we'll do our best to make sure to get all the information to you of how to do that.
And you guys have monthly meetings. When do they happen?
It happens the third Thursday at 1. And we used to do them quarterly. During COVID, we started doing them monthly because we felt like there was a need for just moral support amongst grief workers. And so we started just kind of meeting to check in with each other and do self-care and like just catch up. Where are you at? How are you handling this? What has been working well for you? We've had different speakers present on different topics that maybe are not our topic, which has been really interesting to learn about what people actually do, because like we may all work in grief or have the conversation, but we may all have different little pieces of it, right? And so they're about an hour long from 1 to 2. And lately we've been having a lot of presenters, a lot of people that are in the Bereavement Network sharing information, but also we have local representatives sharing. So we have Jessica from VASH presenting in a couple months to share about how this is something that I'm very passionate about, because in the ER, a lot of times we have guests to the island pass away, and the amount of stress on their face until they realize there's a community that will help them figure out how to navigate getting their loved one home. It's just like you could see the difference in body language and tension almost instantaneously when you say, oh, no, VASH is here and they'll support you. Here's a phone number, call them, and they will guide you through the whole process. And so there's these beautiful resources that kind of just take away the anxiety, not all of it, but at least diffuse it enough where they can take a breath and not feel like the world is just crushing in on them. And then, yeah, so we meet monthly. We're still virtual, so we're still on Zoom. If you're interested in joining, like I said, we love having a community come together for a good discussion. And yeah, so that's the Bereavement Network. And there's so many different people with different voices and resources. And we're always excited to have more. Any other questions or
Thank you,
thoughts?
Sara-May. I'm sure that there are other, so I'm thinking, your question was, are there resources that you've used or things that you really like? So don't worry if it's in that list, but if there's things that you folks, especially on the call, really like, you can feel free to unmute yourself and share or put it into the chat. And Hope has her hand raised.
Sara-May, you were talking about taking a minute with your team. There was that exercise that you were doing, right?
Which one? The breathing ones or the?
Yeah, you had told us about that a couple months back that you just started bringing that back. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that?
Kind of like the mask removal video that Pat shared. Really embarrassingly, what I realized is that I never breathe. I shallow breathe, I naturally breathe, but intentionally breathing I was always bad at it. And then COVID happened and I was like, N95, surgical mask, shield. Let me wear this rubbish bag for the next 10 hours. And I just started shallow breathing and like having no depth to any version of existence, right? Because if you breathe deep, you actually like slightly suffocate. You just can't do it, right? And so what we started doing is reminding people about the power of breath. And so at the beginning of meetings, often we'll actually stop and say, before we go anywhere in this meeting, we're going to take breaths together to make sure that we're actually present and we're like giving ourselves that space, because life has been so fast in healthcare. Some people were Marie Kondoing their house, and some of us were working 20-hour shifts and living off caffeine and Skittles, and it's just like this reality that life was really fast and really slow simultaneously, and everyone feels crazy coming out of it. And so there's different breaths that we do. I challenge people before they go in a room to take 3 breaths as they scrub in. Like, don't even touch the doorknob until you've taken 3 breaths. And then that way, when you walk in the room, you're actually present. At staff meetings, we do rotary breathing now at the beginning, which sounds super goofy. Like, I learned it from a pastor friend of mine, which blew my mind. And what he did was he would say, like, okay, everyone, like, you guys can do it with me. How about this? So everyone push down on the right nostril and take a breath in through the left, and then breathe out through the right. One more time, deep breath in through the left and out through the right. And if you do that like 3 or 4 times at the beginning of staff meeting, you'd be surprised how your energy just kind of shifts. And I think it's because it kind of focuses the oxygen and you have to kind of be present with it, but also you take deep breaths. And the more you breathe, and as you know, it gets a little bit more and more deeper. And what I've noticed is that when we do that before a meeting, especially if I'm doing like a debrief or something like that after a trauma or some incident at the hospital, people can articulate what they feel more. When we don't do that, it's like a ramble of thoughts that aren't always connected and not always relevant. And so I think just kind of that disruption in our day and saying like, hey, let's be more intentional about something as basic as breathing has really actually helped and been one of the biggest resources for me that I could have imagined. So like, it's free, let's do it. But yeah, I think it's quite powerful to realize the importance of breath. And I constantly am surprised by which departments call me and say, can you do this breathing with us for staff meeting? And I'm like, you can do it. It literally is like a minute. And they're like, no, you must lead, And so I think it's just one of those weird things. And so we do a whole variation of things. I actually created a menu of resources so the directors and managers can order a chaplain. So like whether it be stretches, whether it be breath, whether it be a devotional, whether it be a pep talk, whether it be dad jokes, like whatever it may be, you can call the number and order a chaplain, and we come and we do the best we can. And sometimes it's an absolute train wreck, which is even funnier for everyone. So it works out, whether it's perfect or not. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts?
Someone had asked me, what is let grace in? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me actually pull up my handy dandy edited Bereavement Network list because I was just talking with them. So the description here, so the eligibility is anyone grieving the loss of a child, perinatal loss to young adulthood. So it's a pretty big spectrum of kids, right? The services, it's a monthly therapeutic support group, virtual, and then hope retreats, and that's a whole day or a weekend, and the grief recovery method evidence-based educational programs. That's a 7-week one-on-one program offered virtually during COVID, and group programs coming soon. There's no charge for monthly gatherings, and then there's scholarships available for hope retreats and grief recovery methods. So what they do is they have a whole variety of things. They have weekend retreats, stuff for parents and the kids. They have that incredible book. They do a lot of one-on-ones with the kids, and then they have different activities. And I think they're transitioning right now into less virtual and more in person. But I'll make sure that's all updated on there. But they do have an incredible resource. And there's so many good ones. There's Kids Hurt Too. I think that's a really valuable one when we're talking about kids. And then Compassionate Friends, which has a lot of resources because they're more nationwide. And so there's like a whole bunch of places to pull from. And that's, I think, where I hope as we continue to grow that we create a more dynamic and full resource list for people. So if someone's looking for something specific, we're able to kind of target in on that and say, who is an expert here? Who has resources and knows how to handle this? Instead of someone like me, who's had like 2 classes in social work or something crazy, like trying to muddle their way through it. We all have a specialty. And I think that's where let's let each other shine and share what we're good at and make sure that we're supporting our community the best that we can. But Let Grace In is an incredible community, I think predominantly of moms who have lost a child. So they know what it feels like. This isn't just a passion project. They had to muck their way through the grief themselves and figure out how to keep living and how to keep being okay and supporting their other kid as they go through the grief of losing a sibling. And I think that's just a weight that is unmatched by most things. And so I think that's where a lot of their heart and soul comes in it. And they actually just started, Gabby, who's in it, she actually took her yoga teacher training. So she does grief yoga with the kids and the family. And I think there's a lot of movement and breath and recentering that can happen if you have appropriate movement involved. And so she's been kind of mixing that in as well, which is pretty cool. Awesome.
Great. I also noticed that there's people from different islands.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming everyone is welcome.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That people,
absolutely.
Kauai,
Yep.
Maui, Molokai are present on this call. So
yeah. And I think this is what the messed up part and the beautiful part of COVID is we figured out how to be together when we couldn't be together. And I think the superpower in that is that now we know how to do things virtually and we know how to have community virtually and share resources. And so I don't think we're ever, well, maybe I shouldn't say never, but no time soon are we planning on going fully back in person for, our bereavement network. We might try to do like quarterly and then the other ones virtual, but there is a way for anyone to participate. And honestly, it's nice to know what other islands have going on because I'll speak for myself. I work at the hospital and we have a lot of people coming in from outer islands, and to have a name to say, hey, call this person when you get home. That's so amazing. It gives a lifeline to them so they don't feel like they can't reach out to anyone locally. Right. So I think if there's outer islands or anyone that wants to participate, the more love and support we can get, I think the better. Let's do it.
okay, great. So certainly any of the folks who are on the call who want to share, please do so. Reverend Jan asked the question, can anyone lead me to support resources before a death? Resources to walk with someone through the end of life.
Yeah, I feel like we should lean into Rachel for that one. So Dan's actually answering. Dan works at Castle part-time, and he's our palliative care nurse, and he has a lot of insight. He's worked for many, many years in this zone, and navigating the tough conversations and also sitting in those spaces that are probably really uncomfortable for the average person, but for him, smooth as butter. He just goes for it. So I don't know if you want to jump in, Dan, and share anything on that.
Everything is reasonably accurate except for the smooth as butter part. Unless it's really lumpy butter.
Homespun butter.
Homespun butter. I worked for 24 years at Sharp Hospice in San Diego, which some of you have heard me wax nostalgic about my experiences there. I retired from there less than a year ago. But I got the bug to get back into clinical work. And so I have joined the team at Castle, and we're trying to rebuild a palliative care service there. Hospice patients can receive bereavement support after the death of a loved one. There's also what's called pre-bereavement support for people who are having a difficult time with what we call anticipatory grief, meaning they're anticipating, they're struggling with just anticipating the loss of someone they're very close with. We see this a lot with children and adolescents who may be losing a parent, but we also see it with adults who may be losing a spouse or God forbid, a kid or a parent as well. So I am less familiar with how the hospice teams work in Hawaii, being here less than a year, but I'm getting to know what types of services they offer. But every hospice is required to offer some extent of bereavement services. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate to work for a larger nonprofit hospice in the San Diego area that had an excellent bereavement department. The number of the bereavement counselors were people that had been on social workers that had worked on hospice teams with families, and then they decided to just concentrate on the bereavement support. But some bereavement counselors might be LC licensed clinical social workers. Some may be marriage and family therapists who have that strong background in counseling. They do one-on-one counseling with people mostly after someone passes away, but sometimes before. They also offer, a lot of hospices offer bereavement support groups, either virtually or in person. They provide printed resources where people get a mailing, well, at least at Sharp, we did that. We sent a mailing out once a month for 13 months after one of our hospice patients had passed away. So even if someone was only on hospice a very short time, hours or days, they still have access to those bereavement services. And some bereavement programs are offered to the community at large, depending on the organization and their resources. So hopefully that is helpful. So,
yeah. Oh,
not long for this world. Hopefully they're already receiving hospice care. Talk to the hospice team about anyone who is struggling in the family, and either the social worker or a bereavement counselor can offer some type of counseling and support.
Yeah. And one thing I would add to that, I think pre-bereavement, like when we talk about pre-bereavement, I think that's where Kokua is like a big resource, because if they get everything kind of their advanced directives and all this stuff kind of in line, the anxiety and unknown factors kind of get taken out of it. So at least then when the family's making decisions, there's a clarity in that decision. And so you're not bundling all of that also in the conversation of how do we handle this, right? It kind of helps everyone get on the same page and ground everyone. Hopefully if you all come to the same conclusion, but I think there is a lot of beauty in those conversations and then being honest about how you feel. And I see that Pat put some resources in.
Yeah. So Sara-May, one of my favorite books is Gone From My Sight. It's a little blue book, but it talks about what are some of the symptoms 3 months before somebody dies? What about a week before somebody dies? How does the breathing change? It helps families who are worried because somebody has stopped eating or they're not drinking. And that really fits in with a palliative care consult or a hospice consult, because oftentimes people will ask, can't you start an IV? Couldn't you do TPN? All of those things. And so I really like that. It was written by a nurse. Her name is Barbara Carnes. Sorry, I put Barnes, Karnes. Anyway, if you go to that site, Gone From My Sight, you can also somehow maneuver around. And that's it. Thank you, whoever did that. But she has a blog, and there's all these other books. Look at that. The 11th Hour, Caring for Hours to Minutes Before Death, Living with a Life-Threatening Illness, a guide for caring at home. But she does it in such a kind, compassionate way. You feel like she's right beside you, and she really cares. And there's the blog on end of life. Oh my God, these are so good. We euthanized our cat yesterday. Why? Oh, the last one that she just did. Why I believe a person should be told they can't be fixed. So that one was very good. About helping people to not go on to, their fourth regimen of chemotherapy, or wanting their family to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks, Pat.
Sure.
I think I saw Rachel unmute. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Melanie Dwyer, who's the CEO at Hospice Maui, may have some additional illumination to share about how they handle bereavement there.
Nice.
I was seeing if we could pick on Mel to do that.
Hold on. See, no, I just had somebody that came up and started talking to me a few minutes ago. So I'm kind of in a little hot spot where I'm located. So if you all could repeat what you're asking me to comment on. Yes, I'm actually am in a meeting with other people.
The idea that we're discussing is sort of pre-death grief bereavement support for families. And Dan had talked about what he experienced at Sharp in San Diego, of how people, the support that exists. And then so that was the question, if you want to speak about that from what you guys are able to do able to offer on Maui.
So for us, grief support before someone dies is handled by our chaplain. So our chaplains are non-denominational. They're an integral part of the team from admission. A chaplain gets assigned to every patient, and they can decline a chaplain. And then the patients and families are then still followed by their social worker and a nurse. And what I often see is that maybe, at the beginning on admission, maybe somebody does decline the chaplain, but then as they move further along in the process, and maybe sometimes it's the patient that really needs the support, and sometimes it's a member of the family and the primary caregiver. And so our social workers and our nurses do a really excellent job of assessing for this, and when the time is right, try and invite the chaplain to come back in. And sometimes it's just to talk story, to have that, start having that relationship. A lot of our chaplains also do Reiki. So sometimes that is, can be a way to kind of get our chaplains in to help and offer support. So that's the way we handle the grief support prior to death. And so the times that I see a patient and family supported kind of holistically with the entire care team are when there is all the members of the team are in, including the chaplain, and kind of most prepared for death and the grief piece of it. And so those families, I feel like, may require minimal bereavement support after death. If they've gotten a lot of support prior, there's a lot of preparation that goes into that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, I often say, like, here in the hospital, we're not the same as hospice in the sense of chaplains are not always assigned. We kind of find our way and follow up on the needs that are presented. But a lot of those conversations, one of the things I found is having a conversation or empowering a family to have a conversation actually can be really helpful. because a lot of times people don't know how to start the conversation and they don't want to be the family member that does. You know what I mean? And so kind of creating that space for them and not saying like something intense, but really just saying like, how are you guys feeling? Do you have any questions or concerns? You know, like opening up a dialogue with them to give them the space to be able to process and like start the conversation. And I'd say like often people lean into their belief systems and then like their community people that are like-minded to them, whatever that may be. And so figuring out how to get them to be empowered to lean into those spaces. Anyone else? Thoughts, questions?
So I put a link in the chat to a page, to our most visited page on our website, which was a, we're not sure which national groups are linking to it, but that page gets like 100,000 hits a month. And the rest of the Kokua website, it's like us using it, but it's people really like it. And I will say Greg Lagoy, former director of Hospice Maui, was one of the main writers of it. And so people have really, really like this page. So that's another thing to link to. I was wondering, there's a question I often get, which is people are looking, like people who haven't been in, like their loved one didn't die here with hospice, but they need a support group. And so, and you mentioned too, that some of the hospices will let people in. Is the best thing to do I usually say you can ask a hospice, but I don't know if any of the hospices have an opinion or something they can share about that.
Well, I've been calling different hospices to update what groups are available, like, because some are free, some you have to be in hospice in order to participate in. Others, there's a small fee because it's like a week, like a 13-week program or a 10-week or a 7-week program. So I think the cool thing about hospice is that most hospices, from what I understand, and Melanie, you can correct me, is that you don't have to be one of their patients in order to receive grief support. You get all the information if you are with that hospice, so it's easily handed to you. But I've had patients call a hospice and say, I need support for this, and it's not something I could provide. So I gave them a local hospice name, and they've been able to get into groups and support that we wouldn't have been able to provide because we're not technically outpatient, like chaplaincy service and debriefs, right? So yeah.
So it
and you're correct. It is all of our services, grief support are free to the community. And so that's something with our outreach that we always want people to know, that they don't have to be families of prior patients of ours. They, anybody is welcome to call and reach out for bereavement and grief support.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. That's so important to know.
Yeah. And as people that refer people to grief support, like I think the coolest part, especially about Hawaii in general, is that if you talk to any grief worker around, they're not going to say, no, we're not going to help someone, right? They're going to do their best to make sure to care for someone in their community. And so whether it's them or whether they know someone else, it begins to open up. So I always tell people, ask the question, don't just read the blurb. Like if you are curious about something, call the place and see what they suggest you do. And so there's always more and more opportunity.
Great. One other resource that I forgot to mention before is if you are wondering what a chaplain does, there was an excellent presentation, I don't know what was that, last week, that Sara-May did about what a chaplain does, and it was really well done. I don't know if the recording has been put together yet, but I loved it because the doctor who invited you to talk said, I had no idea that this is what a chaplain does. I think she was expecting it to be much more religious or, last rites kind of a thing. So it was actually really great to have her introduce you, with that as the caveat, but then you, of course, did a fabulous job of talking about what a chaplain does. So if people are interested, and also if you want others to know, hey, there's a chaplain, that's out there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a big clarifying point for me because I've been both a pastor and a chaplain in my career, and people often are like, so you're just there to pray or do the last rites. Like you only call for this like 3 to 5 minute thing. And I'm like, are you kidding me? How boring would my life be? I mean, it would be awesome because, I'm down with that. But at the same time, that's not the thing I do my whole day. Like I don't just walk into rooms and like throw things around and like say a quick poem or prayer and walk out. It's a lot more. And I think depending on the facility and location, like hospice chaplains are with almost all, they do a screening for almost every single patient and offer support and make sure they have that support and do a lot of those tough conversations. And chaplains often are the ones carrying the resources because people like Dan who are rock stars don't have time to sit and listen to the presentation of whatever animal they have that's 20 minutes long before you can get to like the actual meat of the conversation and find out what their fears are, what they're looking for, or any of those concerns. And so there's just a whole spectrum of things that chaplains can do. And a truly board certified chaplain is trained clinically and theologically to understand world religions and just spirituality in general. And then also just like when to refer and where to refer to and where their voice can be and where it should not be. So I think if you have a board certified chaplain around, I would use them way more than I think a lot are being used because they've had to go through a lot of schooling in order to get to where they are.
Well, I hope you're seeing in the chat there's a general, a lot of positive comments and thanking you, Sara-May, but also our group as to, for all the resources that are out there. And if folks haven't read through the guide, you will, I would just encourage you to look and see what amazing resources are available in our community. And, there's groups that are quite specific to help people out. As we can all imagine, there's some things are very specific and you want other people to understand what you're going through. So certainly for professionals, there are a lot of resources that are out there.
Yeah, and one last thing I do want to say, like I was voted as tribute to Share, but this is a team of people that help run the Bereavement Network. There's 4 of us that try to do a lot of the legwork, but it's not just 4 of us. It's literally every person in the Bereavement Network. And so every voice really does count and every little nook of wisdom is so powerful. And so if you guys do want to be part of it or have questions about it, I think my email was put in there. Feel free to email me and then I'll make sure that the whole team gets the question or whatever, and let's figure out how we can support our community even better than we already are. Because I think it's really all of us coming together. And then if you see a big hole and you're like, who's doing this? Maybe there's someone out there and we just don't know. And so that gives us intentionality in digging and finding out how to fill that space for people.
Fabulous. So as we come to a close, it's also, if you have any last questions, I want to say that having done this work for quite a long time, and for those of you that don't know, I began working in serious illness care in the AIDS pandemic. I lived in San Francisco, direct, ground zero for HIV and AIDS, and the grief and loss that the community felt was very intense. But we could all go dancing at night and do stuff. And in the pandemic, I mean, we did have dance parties alone at home, but that's a little bit different. And I feel like our community is really, boy, we have a long way to go there's a lot of grief that wasn't talked about and processed and discussed. And, how many funerals never happened. Not that people even died of COVID, but we didn't get to have the noodles in the basement and talk story and do all of those things that we do to grieve with each other. So I think the Bereavement Network is really important. And I'm glad that all you folks are now hearing about this and thinking about it. And certainly from Kokua side, I just think we can't pretend that we're done with the pandemic and that there are not going to be for a long time consequences of what we have all lived through. And so I'm so glad I have amazing colleagues who also lean into this and have ideas about what we could do. Just that I feel like, again, those people who didn't Marie Kondo their house, like the rest of all of all of us, we're exhausted, and we all need a paid 2-month spa retreat, and we're not getting it. So I think we need a good big dance party. Actually, we could do that. One of my friends asked me about that the other day. You're all invited, but boy, I just think that there's a lot of unaddressed grief, loss, anxiety out there in our community. So it's great to know that all of you are here. So unless there's other questions, I would say thank you again to Sara-May for sharing her resources. Thank you to the Bereavement Network for all the great work that goes on. Thank you, Pat, for reminding us that we're superheroes, and that Twisted Sister is an excellent way to get up off your chair and dance. So thank you very much, everybody, for that.